Grace, peace, and welcome to Podcast of the Wills, a podcast that treats Star Wars like a sacred text. My name is Nick Milkey. It's Sunday night. We're hanging out. We're talking Star Wars. It's my favorite thing to do in the week. And here we are. We're doing it again. There's people in the live chat already. I've seen conversations. I've seen people claiming first to be here. It's always a good feeling when I come in on a Sunday night and nobody in my house really understands this weird hobby of mine, but I get to sit down in front of my computer, connect with my friends, and it's extra exciting when they've gotten here 73 minutes early and there's a race to be the first one in the comments. So I appreciate all of you greatly. I'm so glad y'all are here hanging out on a Sunday night. And I have an exciting guest. I don't have news. Last week we did news. We had a great news segment. Shout out to our friend Jackson for coming in on Easter Sunday to bring some of his leppy magical goodness to a news segment. There's not really any Star Wars news this week. That's okay. Sometimes no news truly is good news. We know they're working on the Obi-Wan show. Bad Batch comes out in like 20 something days. There's lots of good stuff happening. So we're not going to waste any time. We're going to get to our guest, my guest tonight. I am super excited to bring on this gentleman. My guest tonight is a young man named Pete Fletzer. Pete is the host of the Around the Galaxy podcast. And I found Around the Galaxy in April of 2019. And I think it was maybe his third or fourth show. He had gotten it started. I've listened to podcasts for years, usually sports, movies, how did this get made, some of those kinds of things, humor, comedy stuff. And at some point, that light bulb came on after I had discovered Star Wars Minute. And I thought, I bet there's other Star Wars podcasts. Well, boy, was I surprised. But one of the ones that I found as I was searching was Around the Galaxy. And the very first episode of Around the Galaxy I listened to, I was hooked automatically. Pete's such a good interviewer. He brings on guests that are interesting. And a lot of what he does and the people that he has on are the things that I'm super into, which is behind the scenes. How did things get made? Process stories, people that work on Star Wars. And so right away, it was a show that I added to my subscribes list and caught every week when it came out. Well, Pete made the mistake in that podcast that at the end, especially in the early versions, of saying, if you or someone you know should be a guest on my podcast, send me an email, reach out on Twitter, whatever it was. Well, sucker, I did. I reached out and he didn't know who I was. It was 2 years ago. And I said, hey, I should be on your podcast. I have a Star Wars podcast. Nobody's heard of it, but I'll come talk to you about Star Wars. That's what I like to do. And he was very nice. And he's like, oh, sure, I've got some stuff booked. Let's see, you know what? Very kind. And over time, he communicated back and forth on Twitter, just conversation, comments about shows he did, all that kind of stuff. Always kind to respond, always kind to engage with the fans. And that meant a lot. That was something that was important because, he wasn't big timing anybody. He was being Pete, which is who I've come to know as what I call a friend. We text pretty regularly. We communicate. He's been kind enough to kind of help talk me through things when I'm figuring stuff about the show, be a sounding board. And so that's what I want to say about my guest, Pete Fletzer, is he truly is a Star Wars fan. He truly is a Star Wars fan who loves other Star Wars fans. He's generous with his time. He's generous with his show. And also my kids think he's a celebrity because we listen to Around the Galaxy on the way to school in the mornings for the last couple of years when we used to still get to go to school. And so it was one of those things like, oh yeah, I was talking to Pete from Around the Galaxy. And they're like, seriously? Around the Galaxy? Like, they don't know who he is, but he's the guy that we hear on the radio when we go to school. So Pete is truly one of the best guys that I've met through this Star Wars community, through this podcasting community. And so it is a big thrill for me to have him be on with me tonight to talk Star Wars, to have a drink. So without further ado, I want to bring in my friend Pete Fletzer.
Hey, Nick, how are you? Wow, what an intro, man. I feel like there's so many different things to comment on that, but thank you so much. First of all, I'm glad to finally meet the guy who listens to my podcast. That's great. It's
here I am. I'm that guy.
No, and it's funny too, because I remember actually I can still picture exactly where I was when I actually listened to your show the first time, because we did go back and forth a couple times, and I remember I was sitting in my car and I was like, I told Nick I was going to listen to it and I'm going to listen to it, and I did, and I've listened ever since, which is really cool. And it's the Star Wars community is so awesome. All the people, I'm looking in the chat here while you're talking, and just the group of people who regularly hang out with us and on Twitter and in our shows and things. It's so great. And honestly, I was saying to to Scotty from Bombadcast just the other day that this small group of people, yes, we all have multiple followerships and things like that, but that small group that's here with us almost every night during the week, people that we text with, people that we've become friendly with, that kind of got a lot of us through this past crazy year, and hopefully we're coming out of this, and I'm certain all these friendships will continue. I mean, that's just one of the amazing things about Star Wars. So, but
it really
thank
is.
you for the kind intro. I appreciate it.
I mean every word of it. And like I said, I bother you multiple times during the week. Hey, what about this? Hey, I'm thinking about this thing. What do you think?
And I bother you too. So don't forget that.
And I like that. And that's what I love again about this community. And that's the word that I always come back to is there's a support here. There's somebody that goes, oh yeah, I do something like that. Or have you tried this? Or Scotty, you mentioned Scotty. One day I was trying to figure out how to do the whole, share the screen, put up slides and all that.
Yep.
And I asked you and you're like, I don't know, but I can find out real quick. And next thing I know, Scotty had sent a text video. He made a video of how you do it as a, help section, tech support for old people like you and me.
That's right.
And that really is something that's important to me in this community is the ability to connect. It makes the world a little bit smaller. Like you said, in the last year, it makes the world seem a little less, frightening. And what the hell have we been dealing with?
Yeah.
To have people to connect with and to have the chance to make these friendships, like you said, in the live chat. We've got a lot of our friends that watch both of our shows and hang out with us and we interact with. And so I'm thankful for that shared community. I'm thankful for the chance to hang out tonight. And I hope for you that this is a chance for you to be in the guest chair, not the host chair, and actually get to hang out, not do quite as much work.
It is nice to kind of just sort of chill out and answer questions. Although I find that it's, I've been on a couple shows over the last year, and I find sometimes it's harder for me to answer questions than to ask them. So I'll do my best.
Well, I have no worries that we're heading in a good direction with our topic. But the first order of business, and maybe the most important order of the business of the night, is my continuing journey to try and become the Stanley Tucci of Star Wars podcasts with drinks, cocktails named after guests. I took a little bit of a different route with you tonight. This is not what we would consider a classic cocktail,
right?
But it is definitely something that's classic. And to me, that's appropriate because, and this is not an old joke, but
where we go with
what this? You do is what I consider a very classic chat show kind of show. Mm-hmm. Whether I grew up loving David Letterman, a little bit of Johnny Carson when I was younger. David Letterman, a lot of the podcasts that I love are longer form interviews. It's a chat. It's a chance to get to know somebody, to be in depth. And one of the things that I always grew up seeing in movies, I feel like especially in one of the seasons of The Wire, when it was the harbor episode and they're down by the water, every time somebody went to a bar, the drink that they had was they walked up to the bar and they ordered a shot and a beer.
Yeah.
And to me, that was very classic and very Americana in some weird way.
Yep.
So our drink tonight is what I am calling, I hit a wrong button here, is Pete's Blaster Shot and a Beer.
Oof.
So there's no fancy recipe here. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to have a shot. We're going to have a beer. And maybe somewhere along the way, we'll have another beer, another shot, depending on how things go.
Nice.
But let me get us... I'm going to get my shot.
I have to say, one of the things that's really interesting to me about this, when we decided to do this, I realized I don't have any traditional shot glasses in my house. So I'm just going to pour it into a nice whiskey glass. And
it totally works. Well, I have my favorite Star Wars decanter, which is an old bottle with Star Wars stickers on it that I keep refilling.
Very nice. I'm drinking the Metallica blackened whiskey this evening.
Ooh, yeah, that's extra fancy.
That's a nice looking bottle. I don't know if it's any better or worse, and but I did pour a shot in here.
I love it. Well, cheers to you, my friend.
Same to you, buddy. Actually, that's pretty damn good. I like that a lot, and the beer, of course.
Of course. Well, and I'm rocking 2 X's tonight.
Dos Equis.
The Dos Equis Amber, by the way,
nice.
Which is my favorite.
And I'm going Guinness. It's the beer that eats like a meal. So
I love a Guinness. That you can't ever go wrong with a Guinness. So cheers to that as well.
Absolutely not.
Cheers to that as well. Well, as we get into our conversation, we've got a great top 7 list that we're going to get to it just a little bit. But what I want to talk about first of all is, of course, I know your Star Wars story. We've talked about this. I've heard you talk about it on your show. Some of our listeners do, but some of our listeners don't maybe know your entire story and all of that, which is cool. I would love for you to tell me. I know you grew up. I think you said you were 7 when you saw Star Wars.
I was, yeah.
Tell me about your memories of seeing Star Wars that very first time. Where were you? What was the theater? How much of that, really sticks in your mind? I'm sure as a 7-year-old, you probably have a pretty good memory of it, but tell us about that and as much of that experience as you can remember.
It's interesting because the theater experience, I have very little memory of seeing the movie itself. We went to this big I guess it was like whatever the bigger screens were at the time, and my dad would kill me right now if he was hearing me not remembering but it was like the largest format screen. Of course, it wasn't IMAX because it was 1977.
Sure.
But it was the largest format screen. It was in New Jersey, and again, I don't remember a lot of the movie per se. I remember I have vivid memories of the Tatooine scenes when the droids came down for the first time. But I don't really remember a lot of the movie. What I do remember, my most vivid memory of seeing Star Wars that first time is sitting in the way far back of my parents' station wagon, doing two things. First thing is I was pretending I was C-3PO. I was just sort of sitting there, like staring out the window. And then the second thing was I was pretending to shoot TIE fighters as they flew by the car. As oncoming traffic, would come by. And it's interesting because, it's funny. Those are the very solid memories that I have from that day. And I look at my 8-year-old son and I see him kind of, it's the big difference between my son and my daughter. My daughter's a firstborn, so she was with us at all times.
Sure.
My son does a lot of play by himself, and somehow I end up kind of, I'll watch him from a distance and I'll associate with those sort of making up your own stories as you go. And I think that's one of the interesting things about Star Wars too, is right off the bat, you start making up your own Star Wars stories when you're a kid. And maybe it was because there wasn't 15,000 comic books and novels that were coming out, but certainly, the action figures and all that, we jumped in. Of course, I didn't have the action figures in 1977 because they didn't come out that year, but just wanting to go back to that place and go back to that Star Wars universe as soon as we could. We didn't see it till late summer. But again, it didn't matter because there was no spoilers really. Right. I wasn't surfing the web at 7 years old, and my friends weren't trying to ruin a movie for me. All we knew is that there was this amazing phenomenon that was happening. My other really vivid memory is my first Star Wars collectible, or not even collectible, but first Star Wars thing that I owned was my grandmother for my 7th birthday, which was in July. It was before I saw the movie. She gave me a Star Wars t-shirt, and it's a classic t-shirt, and I need to look it up. It's one we've all seen it. It's R2 and 3PO standing there in the hallway.
It's got the logo under the bottom. It kind of has the shape over it.
Exactly. And so that was my very first thing and in my head, for some reason, I believed that C-3PO was the bad guy. And I don't know why, but my 7-year-old brain was like, that's the bad guy. And
he is a monster, He
is a monster. C-3PO is in fact a monster, yes. But it's so those are my really rudimentary early Star Wars memories, and it's this sort of little patchwork of my early Star Wars childhood.
Absolutely. Well, and you talked about, obviously you didn't have the toys because they weren't out yet. Were you one of the early bird toy folks that had ordered the ones that came later?
No, I wasn't. And I don't know why, because it's funny when I look back at my childhood, I think about things like it was the 70s and the early 80s. And I remember, I don't want to say what everybody says, it came from modest roots and all that stuff. I mean, we did. I remember there was, because, unemployment and all that stuff that was happening in the 70s. My dad was out of work for a long time, but yet somehow we always ended up with, the coolest toys and that sort of thing. So while I didn't have those, I do remember having a Millennium Falcon. I do remember having a Dewback. I remember having an AT-AT, and it was funny because my best friend growing, and I have to get my best friend Mike on the show sometime, because he and I used to literally trade action figures. A lot of kids traded baseball cards and things like that. We would trade action figures, and I remember I think I traded him a Han Solo for a Hammerhead, but like we would
Nice.
also borrow each, like we lived literally like a 5-minute walk from each other's house,
Mhm.
but it'd be like, all right, I'll tell you what, if you give me 3 Battlestar Galactica cards, you can have my Millennium Falcon till Tuesday, and
Nice.
then and then I would have his Death Star set for a couple days and that sort of thing. But the toys were, again, what kind of it was sort of the currency of our friendship, which was kind of funny.
No, that's awesome, and it allowed, like you said, we only had one story. There was only one story at that point when the movie came out. There were, the comics started to come afterwards. You get, the holiday special at some point comes there after that one time that it aired. But we got one story, and what we got coming in was we got that one story in the middle of the story. It was episode 4.
Yep.
And so all you had was going outside with a flashlight in the dark and pretending like it was a lightsaber.
Yep.
If you had a blaster, if you took your cowboy and Indian gun and went, no, this is Han Solo's gun now.
Right.
You did that kind of stuff. I've told the story recently. I had a twin bed and it didn't have a footboard on it. And so what I would do is I would push the mattress just forward far enough that the end of it would slope down.
Right.
And then I would sit back up in the top part, and all of a sudden I had an X-Wing because it had the point and the little sit down area. And so I'd sit in my room, like you being a tail gunner in the station wagon. I was, blasting TIE fighters in my bedroom.
Yep.
And so to me, that was that continue. And talking about the play with your kids, I've got 4 girls. My youngest is 5. And it's the same thing. Our twins who were first, we were with them all the time.
Sure.
And they've also always had each other. So it was a different play thing. But when you get to that second, third, fourth, the last kid, you're like, they can do whatever. Like, as long as they're breathing, we're fine.
Are they bleeding? Nope.
Yeah,
okay,
no, we're good. But same thing, watching my kids play, watching, that imagination and how that works. But I have to tell this story real quick. And I think I've told it once before, talking about trading stuff back and forth. In fact, Matthew's in the chat and he said we used to trade custom GI Joes to the klepto kid in the neighborhood. Frank and Amy, great trade. Hammerhead was a phenomenal figure back in the day. So I have a toy trading story, a collectible trading story. The other thing, of course, that I was obsessed with growing up besides Star Wars was Indiana Jones.
Yep.
And when Last Crusade came out in '89, Pepsi did a promotion where if you sent in I think it was 25 UPCs off 12 packs of Pepsi and probably the shipping and handling, they would send you a Stetson Indiana Jones fedora. Well, I found out about it and I had to have one.
Yeah.
So my aunt, God love her, she was always the cool aunt. She took us, everything fun and cool that we got to do usually growing up was Aunt Nancy. She did that for us. So she spent an entire summer buying Pepsi and Mountain Dew, even though she didn't really drink it, and getting these UPCs so that she could order me that Indiana Jones fedora.
That's
awesome.
Awesome.
She ordered 2 of them because she loved it and she introduced me to Indiana Jones. And so she ordered 2 of them and she had one and I had one. It was going to be this special thing. And she gave it to me. It's an awesome hat. Well, at some point I had it for a while. I loved it. And then I did that thing that dumb kids do. And I traded it to a kid in my neighborhood for baseball cards.
Yeah.
And never got it back. It was gone forever when she figured it out. She brought, she was just, to this day, she gives me hell about it. I can't believe you traded that hat. All the Pepsi I had to drink.
So hard.
All the Pepsi I had to drink to get you this hat. So I've told the story about my twins and how they both love Harrison Ford, and one is Indiana Jones and one's Han Solo. And so as the years went on, and I told my aunt the story about the twins and that whole thing, one day out of the blue, we get a box in the mail.
Oh, wow.
And my aunt sent me the one that she ordered for herself that she has had all these years.
That's
She actually sent it to my daughter, Lily. This is Lily's Indiana Jones fedora. But the redemption of the hat, it's still in the family. She still has it. We still have it. And she has told me many times, if you ever trade the second hat, I'll kill you.
Warn your daughters not to move.
That's right. Well, and at this point, it's important enough to me that if she's ever tired of it, it's mine. So
that's right.
It's not going anywhere.
You might want to take that back anyway.
But that's right. But and she loves it. She wears it out all the time. Like when we go out, she loves that hat. It's a great hat. And it makes me happy that she loves it that much.
And I think that's one of the amazing things too about, you and I are both in our early 20s. So So it's amazing that we have children as old as they are. But
That's right.
the fact
And
remains,
that I'm even allowed to drink beer. I mean,
yeah,
it's weird.
really. I mean, you're very close to that being legal. But but what it's funny too when you look at collectibles. Obviously, I got all this crap behind me here on my wall, and my son will come in and he'll just look at it and he'll be like, "Can I?" And like, part of me is like, "Don't touch the Mando helmet." And I'm like, okay." But what's funny is like I was big into the Black Series for a while,
Right.
and still am. But I ended up, I've ended up sort of the ones that I know he's gonna love. I just get one for him, or I give him them. And what's so cool is to sort of like be around the corner and be watching him play with, like a Commander Cody and a Death Trooper and a Boba Fett, and just the little Star Wars story he's creating at that moment is just like me and Matt, my neighbor, when I was, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old in the Sandlot, just, doing our thing. It's just it's so great. And your daughters with their love of these, it struck me these movies are like 44 years old.
Correct.
It's insane. It's insane.
Wild.
And they're still turning out, they're still impacting our children, which is amazing. So.
Well, and we, I have twins. I've talked about that many times. And my oldest daughter, Harper, she's the one that loves Star Wars the way I do. And she's a lot like me. Lily's a lot like her mother. And so Harper's all in Star Wars, and kind of like you're saying about Jackson, like Harper comes out here. I was cleaning in the garage this afternoon and Harper was sitting in this seat in this desk and she was just looking at everything and like, I want to see that. And I want, like it was that moment of seeing it and seeing the wonder. We talk, I've talked a bunch about the hate and the frustration and the fandom when it comes to movies and stuff. And there's nothing more cleansing for me than to go see these movies with my kids.
Yep. 100%.
Like when, Force Awakens came out, when Last Jedi came out, even as confused as I was initially with Last Jedi in those early days, I went and saw it with my girls. And there were times when I looked down the row and looked at them and they were just enthralled. And like, even Lily, who is not as much into Star Wars, it's still that experience. It's still that this is a big, fun movie, something. So Star Wars is for kids. It brings the kid out in me. And I always want it to be that way.
100%.
We talk about the joke we've made before is Lily's been so into Indiana Jones. Harper's been into Star Wars and loves Han Solo. So our running joke is one year, maybe this year when they turn 13, we're going to have a Harrison Ford birthday party. And everybody has to come as their favorite Harrison Ford. And you can get Deckard. You can get Harrison Ford from Witness.
Witness.
Yeah, exactly. Lily right now is reading Ender's Game, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And I was not telling her about the movie because I wanted her to finish the book first. Well, on the way home from church today, she goes, "Dad, you didn't tell me Harrison Ford's in the movie." And I went, "I was saving it because I wanted you to get there." So you could also have General whatever his name is from Ender's Game.
That's awesome.
But it's so fun. It's such a joyful thing. So I love that about your story. Now, the other part of your story that I want you to talk about before we get to the top 7 list is you did something that so many of us crave, so many of us hope for, so many of us dream of. You had a point in your life where you worked for Star Wars. Your job or a part of your job was Star Wars, and you wrote for Star Wars Galaxy magazine.
I did.
Please tell us about how you kind of how you got into that. And especially, I know you worked with Steve Sansweet.
Yeah.
I know you had these great connections. I would love for you to be able to tell our listeners a little bit about that experience, some of the things that you got to do in that role.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny. I often take for granted, just these sort of little lucky things that happen along the way. Right. So the sort of shortened version of what is otherwise a very long story. I was doing my dad, who often comes up. It's so funny. I don't talk about my dad that much when I do my show, but every time I do an interview, he comes up a lot because he played a huge part in, I remember he took me to see all the Star Wars movies, took me to see the Star Trek movies, took me to see Close Encounters, all that stuff. But he and a bunch of his friends had this board game. And Matt, who I believe is in the chat. Matt tracked one down and mailed it to me, and I still have it. And it just, dude, I can't thank you enough for that, Matt. That was such an amazing thing to receive. But so they had this board game, and my dad had me write the Star Wars trivia games. It's funny now that Matt sent me a copy of it, and I read the trivia questions. It's funny how Star Wars has evolved in the last 20 years, and that those questions they're not just remedial. They're like almost like like check to see if you have a pulse kind of questions.
Right.
But long and the short of it is I ended up doing some writing for the marketing for my dad's game as well. And I ended up, it was the early days of the internet, right? It was just right after Al Gore had invented it.
Right.
I had,
a connected series of tubes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, actually I would have to put the things in a little tube, and I would put it in, and people would get them in their houses and open up their article. No, that's not exactly the way it worked, but it was very early days for the internet. And so so I created a site where I wanted to put all my Star Wars writing.
Right.
I think it was like a GeoCity site or something. And so it was a Star Wars website. It was probably one of the, if not the first Star Wars fan website back in the mid 90s. At that time, Steve Sansweet was going around from Star Trek convention to Star Trek convention, showing and talking about the special editions of Star Wars, because of course there was no Star Wars Celebration. Right. But there was all the that was the only place to share science fiction and fantasy stuff. So because I was one of the only, and certainly one of the first Star Wars websites, people started emailing me wanting to know where Steve was going to be, because again, video on the internet was still super slow. So it's not like it was not like they could go and find these clips that Steve was showing. They had to literally go to Syracuse, New York, or Dover, Delaware, or wherever Steve happened to be to see these things. So they contacted me and they're like, "Hey, where's Steve Sansweet going to be?" So I was like, "Look, guys, I'm not an official Star Wars website. I still feel like I need to say that all the time." But I called Lucasfilm and I was said, because I just wanted to get Steve's schedule. I wanted to post up on the website.
As his unofficial press agent, it was time for you to know what was going on.
Yeah, I figured, right. I was pumping him enough. I should probably at least find out where he's going to be. So I called Lucasfilm. And again, keep in mind, this was in the dark times. I think dark Shadows of the Empire was the only thing really happening. In fact, my first author interview was Steve Perry from Shadows of the Empire, who was on my website. So I call Lucasfilm and I say, "Hey, look, I'm looking for Steve Sansweet's schedule for where he's going to be, because I have this website and people are interested." And they're like, "Okay, hang on a second." So I was on hold. It felt like I was on hold for an hour. It was like 3 minutes, and the phone picks up and it's, "Hello, this is Steve Sansweet." And I was like, holy shit. And the reason it was a big deal for me was because I was seriously into collecting at that time. I had more of a collection then than I do now.
Sure.
And I had all of Steve's books and I admired him. I was just such a big fan. And here he is, he's on the phone with me. And so we started talking and I told him a little bit about my writing, and he's like, "Look, I'll gladly send you over my schedule. But if you wouldn't mind, I have more work than I can keep up with here for Star Wars Galaxy magazine. Are you interested in picking up a couple columns?" I was like, yeah, I am.
Hold on, let me think.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, let me get back to you. Wait, I'm ready.
I don't want to be eager, but yes, can we start now?
So I had to send him some samples. So it was back in the day when, my articles were long enough so that I put them in a folder, and I FedExed them to him, and he read them in the plane on his way to Philadelphia to do the QVC show. So those of you that remember the 90s rather, he was doing those QVC Star Wars shows. And he got back to me and he's like, "Great. What's the first thing you want to do?" Now there's a whole other side story, which I don't want to take too much time to tell it, but I was going to the premiere of a Ben Burt created IMAX film called Special Effects.
Okay.
And sort of the calling card, the draw to this IMAX film was that Ben Burt had recreated the opening shot to Star Wars: A New Hope in IMAX. And so that was the big deal. And it was being premiered in New Jersey, where I was living. And it, again, very long, nerdy story about creating on-site coupons to negotiate a deal to go to this thing. And so I told Steve I was going to be there. I said, "Do you have anybody covering that?" He said, "No, but give me 150 words on it, and we'll see how it goes." So first of all, 150 words is probably the hardest article length to write. It's so short. It makes a tweet feel easy, right? I mean, because you have so much to put in. But the thing about it that was fantastic was not only was I going to it, but I was going to it and covering it for Star Wars Galaxy, which means that I was able to speak to Ben Burt.
Right.
which my very first gig for Star Wars Galaxy magazine was speaking to somebody who I absolutely I love. I mean, one of the things that I always love the visual effects of Star Wars,
Right.
but the sound effects of Star Wars were what kind of always pulled me in. And
Yes.
you heard on my show a couple weeks ago, and I did the probe droid thing. Me and my buddy, my friend Mike, who we've been friends with forever, like we have this sort of secret language of Star Wars sound effects that he and I, obviously now more people know what they are, but that was kind of our thing. We've always been in the sound effects. So to speak to Ben Burt was insane. And what I'll never forget about meeting Ben Burt was it almost felt like he was as surprised that somebody wanted to talk to him about it as I was that I was getting to talk to him about it. Yeah. And he was just such a genuinely nice person and just loved talking about it. And as you can imagine, trying to compress that into 150 words and still tell an entire story about the event was pretty wild. But that was my first, and from there, Steve, and that's also sort of the inspiration for Around the Galaxy, is Steve would have me do these sort of super fan columns,
right?
And I would have to find, again, there was no Twitter, there was no internet really to speak of, so to find super fans, I had to go to conventions, or Steve would be like, hey, I know this guy. I haven't spoken to him yet, but he says he's got this amazing Ewok collection. So give him a call. And I met these two brothers from Florida that built like 6-foot Star Destroyers out of plywood. But that was my sort of regular gig for about a year and a half with Star Wars Galaxy magazine. It was pretty wild. Yeah.
That's so cool. And it's such a, like you said, the dream, or like I said, the dream is to work in Star Wars. Something that you did that, whether you got paid a lot, whether it was full-time or not, like you got to work on Star Wars, and it kind of gave you that cred, like you said, to go to that premiere and be like, well, I have a press pass. And even if it was something that you made that said Star Wars Galaxy magazine, you were there officially for something. And that is, wild. I've thought in recent years, seeing, and you've had Ash Crossan from Entertainment Tonight on your show, and to see, these live premieres that have gone on the last couple of years as the sequel trilogy movies have come out.
Yeah.
And we watch those streamed on the internet, and we watch those, however it is. And I just think somebody's job is like, they get to go to the premiere where all the celebrities and hang out and like ask them questions, or just be there, or be in the middle of downtown LA where they brought in a scale model of an X-Wing and a scale model of a something else for a big party because the Star Wars movie's coming out.
And the cool thing about those premieres too, at least because I was very fortunate to have gone to all 3 of the prequel premieres in New York City. And what was cool, and again, this is that whole Star Wars connection to children, right? I remember seeing celebrities with their kids at these Star Wars premieres. I just talked a little bit about it the other day, where when we were in line for Attack of the Clones with my wife, and Karen Allen was behind us with her son, and he was just playing with some action figure, and my wife was talking to Karen Allen, didn't know who it was at the time, but it was just, that's kind of what you
honey,
do. Yeah,
that's Marion from Indiana Jones.
Ravenwood. That is so funny. And then the part I didn't tell on my show the other day, because it was a crazy show, but so my wife turns to Karen Allen once she knows. She's like, "Oh, I didn't realize." She's like, "Oh yeah, that's me." And again, super cool lady. My wife goes, I have to ask, what was it like kissing Harrison Ford? And Karen goes, eh. So I was like, all right, good. I'm not going to lose my wife tonight.
That's
maybe sometime in the future,
but not tonight.
Not to, So
I wonder how Ally McBeal feels about that.
But that was but again, it's those cool little moments, but you take all those and you pile it on to sitting in the back of the car shooting down X-Wings, sitting with my buddy Kevin in grade school, listening to the story of Star Wars 7,000 times on the LP.
Yep,
it's a lifetime of Star Wars memories, and that's what makes this stupid thing that we do every week and spend all this time on Twitter getting actively engaged in conversation. It's because it means so much to us.
That's right. Andy Lemire says he does kiss awkwardly in movies, and now I'm wondering if he's talking about you or Harrison Ford. So,
he's seen all my movies, so he would know.
That's right. And Andy would be the expert on that. He said, "What did I just type?" Andy, it's good to see you. What did I just do? All right, here we go. Well, That's such a great story, and I've heard some of the other stories on your show. I know you had Steve Sansweet on at one point. You've talked about going out to. Did you go to Skywalker Ranch? Is that right?
I did go to Skywalker Ranch. I did, and that was an amazing. And the funny thing is, it's so different now than it was when I went out there. It was, one of my favorite memories was just the fact that I expected to see Star Wars stuff all over the place, and there is now.
Yeah,
but back then there was just this one little sort of short hallway that had a bunch of Star Wars, that there was certainly a Star Wars theme and that sort of thing. But I mean, the highlight, other than spending time with Steve and when Rick McCullum came down the stairs and interrupted our conversation, which was just mind blowing, was we went to lunch and Steve's like, "Do you mind if Don joins us?" And I was like, "Oh, Don B's the guy who's running R2." Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
please join us for lunch. That would be great. But again, it's just these stupid little things that are just so. I sometimes take for granted and forget how cool they are, and I do sometimes. Then you go to that other side, like Clayton Sandell that says, you got to pinch yourself and be like, I get to do some pretty cool stuff,
It's very cool.
Yeah.
Those of us that didn't get to do that, but feel lucky to know you and hear those stories, we're proud for you. We're excited for you. And I'm glad you mentioned Clayton, because that's the perfect transition for our top 7 list tonight. You have had the opportunity on 2 separate occasions to interview Ben Burt. I'm like you. I am a sucker. I'm a sucker for anything behind the scenes. I'm a sucker for anything process story. How do things get made? How did they do that? Where did that come from? And visual effects are very cool, but there's something about sound effects that's another level for me. There's something about, in fact, I joked to you before we came on air, I almost decided for this show just to put on like a 45-minute YouTube video of Ben Burt talking about what he does and let that be the night. But we would have missed these good stories. So I'm glad we didn't do that. But you've got to interview Ben Burt. Clayton Sandell has done a couple of really great pieces about sound in Star Wars. There was one, I think, that was related to the Foley artists when one of the sequel movies came out. Maybe Force Awakens.
Yeah, it was Force of Sound. And I think it was no, it was Last Jedi, because there's porgs in it.
Okay, yeah. And it's such a great piece. And I'm going to link that actually in the show notes in case nobody's never seen it. So shout out to Clayton for that. But our top 7 list tonight, as we were talking last week or the week before, coming on, what's the list going to be, is top 7 Star Wars sound effects.
Woohoo!
This is right in my sweet zone, right in my wheelhouse. It's one of those things that you made a top 7 list. I added a couple things to it at the end that you didn't pick. And we've barely scratched the surface of the amazing things that happen in Star Wars from a sound perspective. And it creates that environment. And I think that's something that isn't to be overlooked, for as groundbreaking as everything that Star Wars has been and was in 1977. We spent a lot of time talking about the camera technology that George and ILM invented to create the shots that they created, to make it feel like it wasn't, Buck Rogers or, Lost in Space or whatever the other, the stuff that came before it, to create these new things. And sound was such a big part of that. The score was such a big part of that. John Williams, earlier this week when I saw that John Williams is going to score the new Indiana Jones movie, I about lost my mind.
Yep, absolutely.
But sound and music both go hand in hand in that. And so to me, I love this topic. I love this category. And so I'm excited about that. To those of y'all that are listening, we're going to play some of these sound effects. I think all of these sound effects, actually, I've got booted up. I hope they're not too loud. I kind of tried to check the sound ahead of time. So hopefully we don't blow anybody out if you're wearing headphones. But Pete's number 7 was C-3PO's servo motors. And I'm going to play the sound, and then I want to hear some thoughts and feedback about why you picked that. Again, a short clip, but it was such a classic. I think about him moving when he's in the oil bath on Tatooine as he's coming up in that turn. Like, it creates an environment. But for you, why was this the first one that you put on your list?
Well, it's funny. For some reason, I don't think I noticed them until I was going to say a couple years ago, but I know that's not the case. But it certainly was something that just was so naturally a part of the way C-3PO is presented. And, when you hear those sounds that we just played there, they're perfectly, and that's one of the things about Star Wars sound effects, which I think we'll say for all 7 of mine and the handful of yours is, if you just played those on their own, Yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting sound, but now it is so tied to Star Wars. But I think what makes that so important for C-3PO's motors there is it brings him to life, and it makes him, it's funny, by making him more a robot, it makes him more real, right?
Absolutely.
It makes him more alive, and to just the subtle, and again, that's the brilliance of Ben Burtt. And I hope I don't say that too often over the next couple minutes, but
We can't say it enough. Like, the man is brilliant.
I mean, just those sort of secondary and tertiary sound effects that appear in the film are there, as everybody talks about how George created this world which was used and lived in. True, 100%. But it also sounds like it's all very real. One of the quotes that I always say, and I need to just break down and go find where it is because I need to make sure I'm quoting it properly. But at one point, Ralph McQuarrie, when he was showing Lucas the previs paintings he did, like things of paintings of C-3PO and the stormtroopers, he was like, this is going to look horrible on screen. This is not going to work. And I wonder, like, you look at the picture of C-3PO on the screen right now, like, yeah, it's a cool looking robot. It's kind of classic in its own way. It does have that sort of Metropolis kind of look.
That's right.
It's classic, but and of course Anthony Daniels, his motion and the way he created him, but without those servo motors going, it becomes a costume.
That's right.
And those motors make it a living robot, if you will. I know that's a strange combo of words, but
well, and there's something about the vacant expression in that face, like you said, that picture on the screen, what I call a vacant expression, but there's so much in it, and there's so much, and especially we get it in the sequel trilogy movies where those added moments of levity, Leia said, don't look at me with that nervous look on your face. And he turns and like nothing has changed, but you're like, he looks nervous. Like you see it, you hear it.
It's true.
But you're right. It adds a layer, and it adds a layer that you don't think about in the moment. And like you said, you didn't catch it the first 50 times, but at some point you're like, there's a sound there. To me, that always relates. And of the many things that you and I have in common, my love of sci-fi and especially Star Wars and a lot of the stuff that I have comes from my father. Yeah. And shout out Dad. I think he's watching tonight. What's up? But one of the very specific memories I have was we went to my grandparents' house in Arkansas. They lived right outside of Eureka Springs one summer for visit, whatever. And my grandparents had gotten like a surround sound system at whatever point that was in like the late 80s, early 90s. And my dad set it up for him. And it was like big Marantz receiver, big speakers, tucked into a whatever. And he put on an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation in that surround sound. And the thing that I heard that struck me in that moment was not like, the phaser or, the photon torpedo or whatever it was. It was that in the background, the entire time the show was going, was you could hear the underlying hum of the engines of the Enterprise.
Yep.
It was an ambient, but it gave it life. It wasn't a cold, static, sterile, just a hallway where, space stuff happens.
Yeah.
Like it felt real and it felt alive because of that. And it blew my probably 10-year-old mind at that point.
It's interesting you say that because I think that the first place that I noticed ambient sound bringing something to life was Star Trek: The Original Series when I would watch those, with my dad.
The sound later. On the bridge
just,
of
yeah,
that
just the constant, all the little beeps and chirps and things happening. Yep,
for sure.
But again, it's those, and that's what is so great about 3PO's motors is it's just subtle enough to give him life, and the fact that I never noticed it until years later is living proof that it worked perfectly. It was naturally there.
Absolutely. And I want to point out, Andy just said all droids in Star Wars have such distinct personalities and they're so fun. It's pretty cool when you realize that none of them actually have facial expressions.
It's a very good point.
My second favorite character in all of Star Wars is R2-D2. He's a trash can that beeps.
Right.
But there's so much personality. There's so much there. A couple summers ago, our local minor league baseball team did a Star Wars night in the summertime, and we all went. And there was somebody local to here that's a droid builder that brought his R2. And I saw him standing off to the corner by the bathroom holding literally like a PlayStation 2 control, driving an R2 around. And of course, I was excited. But even my wife, who doesn't really care about Star Wars, she's like, he's so cute. Like there was personality there. There was something that drew you in from something that there's no actual what we see as expression. And we've talked about that a bunch with things like The Mandalorian and Pedro Pascal acting in a helmet. Like there's so much there when there's not anything there.
I mean, The Mandalorian was, if you think about it, it was how many hours of a masked guy and a puppet.
That's exactly right.
And you love every second of it.
And you're here for it. And you watch it over and over
yeah.
again. It's a big deal. So that's an excellent start to the list. And as we jump into the next one, this is another one that for me, this is one of those I remember when I heard it moments. Kylo Ren's lightsaber ignition. That trailer dropped for Force Awakens, and you get this shadowy figure in the woods. This shot, well, it's not this shot, but that hand goes down and it comes on, and then all of a sudden, wait, we're not done yet. 2 pieces pop out of the side. But let's get a quick sample of that. But that is just there it is. Yeah. The ignition part of it, and that's what you picked specifically. That it has, to me, it has the underlying what we called the snap hiss. That was what was used in the Legends books that I read when they talked about Luke's lightsaber, the snap hiss.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I love about it is
Great. Pete's broken.
We'll deal with that later. Yeah. Is it's got personality, and it actually matches the personality that they were trying to get from Kylo Ren, right? It sounds angry and unsettled, and they could have relied solely on the fact that the blade is a little, it's a little glitchy and that sort of thing. But it's the angriest sounding lightsaber of all the lightsabers, and it captures that emotional sound, I think, and that's pretty wild to me.
Oh, it's fantastic. And to me, that lightsaber sound is the equivalent of him pitching a fit in Force Awakens on that Star Destroyer when he just chops the crap out of that computer console. And my favorite part is the 2 stormtroopers come this way and then they turn around and go right back this way. But like, it's a tantrum in a lightsaber. That's what it is.
Yeah, it really is. And again, it's something a little bit different. And that's one of the things I think a lot of people love to say, and rightfully so, that Force Awakens was very much a reboot of A New Hope. And I embrace that. But what I love about it is it managed to bring us something a little bit different and a little different way to look at it. And the scene where Kylo it gets angry and then says anything else to that deck officer is so, it's perfect. And for some reason, well, because of the sound design, it matches everything about his personality. It's raw, and it's like if somebody tried to build their own lightsaber because they were trying to be Darth Vader. I mean,
he didn't want to wait. And the word that I always come to in the years since we've gotten this is petulant. He was a petulant child. He was mad. He was angry. He was hurt from whatever happened, waking up, seeing Luke, all those things that happened. But there wasn't a patience there. Like he was ready to become his grandfather. He was ready to become. And so like you say, and, the lore behind it is that, the kyber crystal that's in his lightsaber, was stressed or cracked or whatever. And so you get this jagged blade, you get this raw, dirty sound. I think Framey said that crackling, dirty burn. Like that's such a good, description of it.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's an excellent choice. Well, are you ready for the next one?
I am. Yeah.
Okay. This is a good one. And this is one of those ones that Millennium Falcon hyperdrive failure. I mean, the look on Han's face when this happens. It's everything I love about a hero like Han Solo, because that's who I wanted to be. He was an everyman. He was a dude just trying to figure it out, trying to put 2 and 2 together, trying to get a fast one by somebody. But when that look on his face, this isn't supposed to happen. Like it's supposed to work this time.
Right. Yeah,
It's not my
It's not
fault.
my fault. That's right. Exactly. Well, I think one of the reasons it sticks with me is because, as I was saying before, we didn't grow up with all the newest greatest things. So like, I remember my parents' car, and my first car, which was a Chevy Citation.
Nice.
Um, I remember it like it died in my girlfriend's driveway at the time, and I was supposed to have left at like 11 o'clock, but it was like 2 in the morning, and I'm trying to sneak out, and of course my car doesn't start, and so
Doesn't
like
help.
it doesn't help, and you just totally you have that. The sound fits exactly like it's much like the lightsaber capturing the raw emotion of
Mhm.
Kylo Ren. The sound of the disappointment in that hyperdrive is just like, oh yeah, I've been there. We've all been in that moment, and again, it's iconic. Just like, but the funny thing is, I think wasn't it also in Raiders?
Yes, the
It was,
airplane, the plane in Raiders.
yeah, yep,
And here's what I love about this, and I wrote this one down because, like I said, I've spent way too much time to admit out loud watching Ben Burt videos, behind the scenes videos about how these things, and this sound in particular is one of the ones that has a lot of the lore behind it, where it came from. And so I wrote down the elements that all combine to make this sound because to me it's so great. So the first thing we have a 1928 inertia starter on a biplane.
okay,
And as far as I understand it, that's that thing in every movie you've ever seen where somebody goes out, grabs the propeller, yanks it
right,
down, and the inertia eventually gets that propeller going. So you've got that as the first element. The second thing you have is an air jet in a dentist office. So that
okay,
hiss, like they're blowing, the plaque out of your mouth, whatever they're blowing out with an air jet.
right.
You have an arc light motor starting and stopping. And this is the one that seems to be a little bit in question. Is it a certain kind of lamp that has a snap to it? But it was something certainly that Ben Burt was in connection with, had
Right.
a way to go with. Tank turret motors.
Hmm.
And as I read this list, I can hear every bit of it.
Yes,
You can hear
absolutely.
that old war movies where the tank turret turns and stops. And then the last part, and of course, this is so Lucas, this is so Star Wars.
Yeah.
The last element is rattling water pipes from the Lucasfilm offices in the 1980s. And
Perfect.
those 5 elements combined give us this right here. And that's the genius of Ben Burt.
Yeah. And it's the perfect sound. Like you couldn't have had a better sound. And it's funny because we're talking spaceships and advanced technology, and you go back to this older technology, these really very analog sounds, and it creates the perfect tone for a movie, which is amazing.
Absolutely. It really is. It may very well be on my Mount Rushmore of sounds as I come back to that favorite trope of mine, which is the Mount Rushmore. All right, so the next one, Darth Vader's breathing.
Yeah.
This clip, and I'm going to hit start on this because it's quiet for just a second. We get the breathing, but we actually have a short little clip of Ben Burt talking about this particular sound effect.
Cool.
The concept for the sound of Darth Vader came about from the first film, and the script described him as some kind of a strange dark being who was in some kind of life support system, that he was breathing strange, that maybe you heard sounds of mechanics or motors. He might be part robot, he might be part human, we really didn't know. And so the original concept I had of Darth Vader was a very noise-producing individual. He came into a scene, he was breathing like some wheezing windmill. You could hear his heart beating. He moved his head, you heard motors turning. He was almost like some kind of a robot in some sense. And he made so much noise that we had to sort of cut back on that concept. In the first experimental mixes we did in Star Wars, he sounded like an operating room, like an emergency room, moving around.
Here's what I love about that right off the bat. Ben Burt, or anybody that works on a movie like this, whether it's Star Wars, Marvel, anything, there's somebody whose job is to sit in a room and think about, what is this guy supposed to sound like? What if he sounds like an operating room? What if he sounds like RoboCop? What if he sounds like the two of those things? Like, that's somebody's job.
Yeah.
And as many weird thoughts as I've had in the history of the course of my life, like, how did I miss the train on something like that?
That sounds like a job I should have tried to get.
I could come up with weird sounds all day long.
Yeah.
But this is on your list, and this is one obviously that's super iconic. There's nobody that, you know, has half a connection with pop culture that doesn't hear this breathing and know what it is. Tell me about your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's for all those reasons that you just said. It's, you know, people who aren't even, you know, who've seen Star Wars once, no, people who haven't even seen Star Wars know what that means and that sound, and again, much like the difference between that and 3PO's motors. 3PO's motors were subtle. This is important, but it's funny that, you know, you can't have Vader without the breathing sound effect. You can't see that figure. You know, I always wanted to get a Ruby's Darth Vader costume or something, but you can't just stand there as Darth Vader. You need to have that breathing sound effect.
You will put that helmet on and you can't help yourself. You will make that noise.
Exactly. But it's one of those things too that, you know, it's they were able to get different character from it. You know, when it speeds up when he's fighting Luke in Empire Strikes Back, when he's dying at the end of Return of the Jedi, it's got the same qualities, but it's got that sort of wheeziness to it.
That's exactly right. Framey just said that. They said that wheezing breathing when he's beaten by Luke is so awesome. Yeah. Like, and that's one of the ones that stands out to me too. There's you feel it as you're hearing it.
Yeah. And it's at that point that you realize that it's not just an intimidating thing, it's a life support system.
That's
it's
right.
Literally,
there's something in there. It's serving a purpose.
Right. And it's again, it's just so iconic, and it's you know, Darth Vader's breathing is Star Wars. It's hard to kind of, you know, go any other way than that. So
yeah, and we all, again, this is another one of those lore driven, you know, as we've had Star Wars for 40 plus years now. You know, it's the story of the microphone put inside a scuba diving regulator.
Right.
And to get, you know, you can almost hear that valve that, you know, closes and opens as that breathing is happening and again, you're sitting there going, that was somebody's job. It was somebody's job to go out with a metal wrench and hit a guy wire on a tower and go, that sounds like a gun. Let's use that.
Well, and just the fact too that, you know, it's so iconic that at the end of Phantom Menace, if you make it all the way to the end credits, you hear Vader's breathing, and then the very first breath as Darth Vader at the end of Revenge of the Sith that puts goosebumps on me when
without a doubt,
the ceiling and then that first breath, and you're like, holy cow, that's how he comes to life. So
and then he screamed no really loud.
Yeah. No. And then he does it again in Return of the Jedi for no reason. But
that's right.
Yeah.
So that's an excellent choice.
Excellent. Good.
All right. So as we continue on, this is such a good one. And this is such a fun Padme's blaster in the Phantom Menace. And we just get a couple of quick samples of this.
Yeah, it's the reason I picked it is because, you know, it's the first of two Phantom Menace choices for me. But the reason I love it is because it's a completely different sounding blaster, and it really harkens back to, you know, one of the things that I remember always saying, and I think I even said something about it to Ben Burt. It was, of course, before the Phantom Menace came out, was one of the things that I loved about the blasters in the original trilogy was it was a different sound, and it's become the sound that pew pew has become the official sound of. But the blaster sound that Padme has that you just played it's as close to reminiscent of, you know, the Flash Gordon sound. The gun looks like a Flash Gordon sound, and it's got that old 50s 40s and 50s sounding. Yeah, exactly. And that's so, and to me, that's one of the great things about Phantom Menace. And again, I am readily willing to admit that I did not love Phantom Menace when I first saw it. It took me many years to get comfortable with it. In fact, it was only a couple years ago, really, that I'm like, okay, I'm totally. But I always loved that sound because it was like, that's what George that's George paying homage to what inspired him, and it comes out in that. And the picture you have on the screen too is perfect because it looks like a Flash Gordon gun.
Yes, it does. It very much looks like, and that's the other thing. We have the sound aspect of it. You have the set decorations and props and all that stuff, and like, you know, taking a German Mauser and turning it into Hans DL-44, finding all these different things. Like I look at this and it looks like the gun that you use to put air in the tires in your car. Like, you know, it's like somebody took, or the communicator that was the Bic Razor in Phantom Menace. Like those little things that I'm like, that was somebody's job. But you're right. There's a very vintage romanticism to something like this shot, and a lot of what George was able to do in the prequel trilogy, which was use even more opportunities to give those nods to the things that inspired him, which I think is really cool.
Yep, absolutely.
Very good. Well, as we continue to move into our list, we are at, I think this is number 2, and this is a classic, no question about it, TIE Fighter.
It's funny when I the 10 questions on my show, and I always ask people what their favorite sound effect is, and a lot of people say TIE Fighter, and the conversation that seems to happen every time somebody brings that up is the fact that sound that you just played, if there was no such thing as Star Wars, that sound effect would be just like, that could be anything, right? You get the you can sort of hear the elephant in there. You can, now that you know that there's the wet tires on asphalt and you can hear it in there. But when I think about Star Wars in 1977, and again, this sort of patchwork of memories of when I was a kid, my best friend, well, one of my best friends, I had a bunch of, we were sort of like one of the first group of these sort of Star Wars nerds that we all hang out with together now. And my buddy Andy, I'll never forget, he used to actually be able to do it. He did like this thing where he'd put his hand over his mouth, and if we heard it today, we'd probably think this sounds nothing like it. But to 7-8-year-old me, it was perfect. But that sound effect, that sound is, it's a TIE Fighter. But if TIE Fighters didn't exist, that would just be a very strange collection of noise.
It would just be, what is this thing?
And you get that I love that sort of spattering at the end. It's just, and it adds, first of all, and this is what was great about Star Wars in 1977. None of the spaceships looked like what you expected, right? Especially because they were trying to evoke that Flash Gordon thing, but they didn't want to create Flash Gordon ships. And a TIE Fighter as a ship design is so unique, and its sound is so unique. I mean, the X-Wing, you could almost make the case, it's sort of a variation of a modern day jet fighter. Yeah, okay, I can see that. But this, I mean, the wings are going the wrong direction. It's just, it's such a cool looking fighter, and the sound is so again, we've been saying the word iconic, but again, without that sound, Star Wars is a different thing. If that sounded like a spaceship from Buck Rogers, TIE Fighters are not as intimidating.
And it has one of those, like, when sounds communicate emotions, like there's fear in this sound. Like it puts you on an edge. I don't know if it's the higher register. I don't know if in Mandalorian, the one episode when we don't have Grogu, when they go to that Imperial facility and they're the tank drivers and it's Space Boston and Mandalorian, and they're going down that road. And he's, they've fought off everybody they can. They're almost there. And then you hear the sound of those ties coming overhead. And, for them in that moment, that was help. But it still triggers that, like, oh, the bad guys are here. Like, it's very iconically connected to, that's what bad guy ships sound like.
Exactly.
It really is, one of those ones that just when it hits you. And in fact, I think I have some bonus ones that we're going to do in a minute. When I was on your show and I answered the 10 questions, I've spent the last week trying to remember, because I didn't go back and watch it. I think I said Hans DL-44, which to me has always had such a good, throaty blaster. It was low, it was cool. But I think I said this one as well, because I can't ever pick one because it's favorite child in Star Wars.
Right.
And this was the other one that, like, it triggers a reaction. It's one of those ones that makes you sit up a little straighter and go, oh, I know what that is, and this isn't good. Or here comes a bunch of those TIE Fighters. It really is iconic. Well, I believe the next one is your number 1, and this is such a great one. Sebulba's Pod Racer.
Yes, sir.
here we go. For anybody, if you don't know this sound, I don't know what to tell you, but here we are.
The reason I go back to that one, number one, is so I've told this story before, but I remember this guy Mike that I tell you I keep mentioning it, and now I definitely have to get him on the show. He's gonna piss him off, but I got to get him on the show.
Right. We're gonna start a hashtag Get Mike on ATG.
Get Mike on ATG. So my best friend growing up, we did an 8mm version of Star Wars. We tried to, and so I went to the Phantom Menace premiere. He did not, so of course I lorded that over him. And when we got together for dinner the night before we went to go see it together, he was like, all right, so without telling me anything about it, like, how did you feel about it? Now, keep in mind, I did not love the Phantom Menace the first time I saw it. I was confounded. I wasn't sure what to think of it. I didn't know how to feel. So my response was, the pod racer sounds are amazing. And I remember seeing this at the premiere, and the sound of Sebulba's pod racer literally, like, it felt like punches in the gut. And it captured it so perfectly, because even the picture that you picked there was perfect, because not only did Sebulba's pod have, I mean, all the pods had their own specific sounds, which is, again, brilliant sound design. But it sounds bigger and meaner and like a bully. And you look at that picture and you realize that it's because he's got these big giant engines compared to Anakin's little tiny sort of whiny engines. And it captures, again, every one of these sounds captures a personality in a way that just showing it and just saying it does not portray. And so the sound,
and that's one of the things that stood out to me. I fall in the same boat with you when it comes to the prequels, coming around to the prequels in later years, how I felt about them when I saw them. But even when I saw this movie the very first time at the movie theater, after that fake stage line for the news that I've talked about before, this is one of the scenes that stood out.
Yep.
And it stood out for two reasons. One, because it felt like it was too long, even in 1999. I was like, can we move it along now? But the sound, and as much as I love sounds and stuff, and like you said, the individual different sounds. Ben Quadraneros's pod racer had a different sound than Anakin's, than Sebulba's. And this one was menacing. This one was heavy. This one was in your face going, come on. Like it just, it was almost repetitive and kind of hitting you in the face.
Yep.
And so, of course, I had to look it up, and I had to kind of figure out as we were getting ready for this weekend. There's a great article on Sci-Fi that talked about, at the point where they were filming a bunch of the stuff that they were filming in Tunisia, what they were working on when they were shooting Phantom Menace, and there was this huge sandstorm, and it tore up like a bunch of the sets and a bunch of the stuff that like they were supposed to shoot the next day. Like a bunch of that stuff was basically a wash. Like the podcast, the pod racer scenes, some of that was on the verge of being scrapped because they had set up, these shots and things that were going to do. But they managed to pull it out. They managed to come up with it. And the sound has so much to do with that, and has so much to do with what makes this scene iconic and stand out. And what it says in the article is that, and they didn't say who it was, but someone generously offered to punch a hole in the muffler of their Ferrari in order to get the Sebulba pod racer sound.
That's very nice.
So that fed through some of the processors and the synthesizers and the stuff that, of course, Ben Burtt utilized, and Matthew Wood, because Matthew Wood worked on a lot of these as well with Ben Burtt. And, but the core of this particular sound is a Ferrari with a hole punched graciously in the muffler of it.
That's beautiful. That's awesome.
So that's cool. And one of the other ones is a Porsche. Like there's a lot of car stuff, and you hear it because it's the race. And so you have that. To me, it sounds like F1. And I've not been to an F1 race, but you see him on TV, or Iron Man 2, where he's out in the, past the mic, past the Doppler effect, all that. But to me, it's just one of those, like, this is an idea that somebody had, and somebody went, and again, whoever the dude was that owned the Ferrari, that was like, what I think would work? Let's punch a hole in my muffler and
damage
record
my
that.
car. Yeah. Yeah.
To me, that is a huge, sacrifice, but also it just builds to this thing that we love, and it builds to this sound that's iconic. I remember in the Pod Racer video game.
Yep.
One of the menu sounds that just went over and over and over again. And at some point, and if you're really a sucker for punishment, you can go to YouTube and there's loops of just the idling Sebulba Pod Racer that's like 10 hours at a time. So I don't know if that's Chinese water torture. I don't know what that is. But
great to sleep to, I think.
Yeah. If you want to have weird dreams, Scotty, I'm looking at you. Play this in the background overnight while you sleep. All right. So here's what we're going to do. I have a couple of bonuses that I want to add in, as I tend to do. But I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't have one more shot to go with to wrap up.
Who am I say no to that? That'd be rude.
I mean, it's just work on Monday. What are we talking about here?
Well, work from home anyway. It doesn't matter.
Well, some of us have to go into the office, but we're game day players, so we're going to rally, right?
That's right. This is why we're here. Cheers.
Cheers to you, sir.
This was great. Man, that Metallica whiskey is doing it. That's good.
That's right. An official endorsement, Pete Fletzer, Metallica whiskey.
Yeah, if they're listening, I'm willing to speak about it on my show.
Lars, give him a call. Let's make something happen. Yeah. All right. Well, I have a couple, and this is kind of my go-to when we do these. Is I love your list, and your list is perfect. I had to pick every one of them, but I think what else would I have wanted to put in there?
Yes.
So I've got a couple. The first one that ties to yours is the Millennium Falcon startup sound.
Yeah. Yep.
And this shot in particular hit me in the feels, as the kids would say.
Yeah.
When Last Jedi came out, which I love, no apologies. When Luke walks into the Falcon, he sneaks in that night. You get that great shot of, Chewie sitting at the fire. Yep. And you see his shadowy little self go up the ramp. He comes in there. But he walks into the Falcon and he goes up onto the cockpit.
This bucket of bolts is never going to get us past that blockade.
Speeder's got a few surprises left in her, sweetheart.
That obviously that wasn't from that movie,
right?
But that high pitch whine, that sound, and that was from Empire when he hits right there over that doorway. It doesn't start, and there's a part of me that goes, "What is he hitting in the doorway that made that go ahead and start?"
Well, that's what I love about it too. Is he's just walking around, flipping switches, pressing buttons, turning dials, punching things, and again, it's much like Macquarie said, this shouldn't work, but it does.
It absolutely does.
And Harrison Ford, for all his complaining about you can write this stuff, but you can't act it. I mean, he gives a very convincing performance, looking around, rolling up his gloves, clicking things, pulling things, and it works.
And I wonder, and I'm sure at some point somebody has had the chance to ask him it. If Harrison wants to come on my show, I'm glad to have him. I'd love to ask him these questions, just putting it out there. Seems unlikely, but whatever. Weirder things have happened. But I wonder at what point, because I would guess, especially in the 70s and 80s, but certainly when you go to Force Awakens, Harrison Ford is a pilot.
Yeah.
And so where at some point...
Not a very good one.
Not a good one. We crash on golf courses. We have some issues. But at what point did some of that, did one influence the other? Excuse me. Did one influence the other? Did something become, connected to Han flipping switches or, sitting down? I don't think he was a pilot in the 70s when he was a carpenter working, building stuff, and he happened to get a shot to be in American Graffiti and then this. But it really is one of those oh yeah, he actually is a pilot. He actually does fly stuff. And so especially by the time you get to Force Awakens and he's already crashed on a golf course and he's already done these other things, there's a part of you that wonders, knowing what we know about Harrison Ford, he's probably why am I flipping these damn switches? This isn't how you fly an airplane.
This isn't how you fly an airplane.
This isn't how it goes. We can all do impressions now. But so that was my first of the bonus choices, is that startup sound. And if you have the official Star Wars app, on your phone, you can pick I think you can pick droids, and there's two other motifs or themes or whatever. And one of them, when you open it up, that sound is the sound when the app just boots on your phone if you have the sound turned on. So it's very satisfying, as my children would say.
Yes.
All right. The second one I have is the probe droid.
Yes.
Now, for those of you that follow me on Twitter, for those of you that are familiar with Pete and our good friend Jackson, who is in the chat, I did have to put in parentheses actual.
Right.
Because our friend Pete, our guest tonight, Pete, has done an amazing impression of a probe droid.
Amazingly
it's on the Twitter
bad.
feed.
Yes.
It really is fantastic. But this is one of those sounds, much like the TIE Fighter, that sticks with me and is terrifying. And so I have this, and it's missing an element, but what you don't get in that, you get the sound of it communicating whatever it's doing, sending signals back to the Imperial base. But then what normally is under that is that like low hovering hum,
Like,
as it's So you got that the ambient hum.
Yep.
With that, and that's just and then it's got creepy like spider legs, and it just kind of flies across the thing.
Yep.
It's scary as hell. Like that was one of the ones as a kid that freaked me out.
All right, how many legs does a probe droid have?
It has 5.
Very good.
Right?
All right.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
good.
Okay. Good. Despite the fact that I lost on Force Connect trivia last time, I had that one.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's again, it's whenever I've had 45 surround sound systems put in, but the couple times I've had a surround sound system put in, I remember I had one when I was, I think I was still working at Radio Shack and whatever.
Okay.
And then when I had the one put in at my house, the very first thing I played is the opening of Empire Strikes Back, where the probe droids come launches out,
Yep.
lands with that big bassy thump, and
Mm-hmm.
then you have to get the probe droid coming up with that sound you're talking about too, which is so important. And again, personality, creating more with just sound. It does look like a creepy spider, and those communication sounds are important, but that sort of almost horror movie kind of soundtrack below it is critical to making it work.
Yes. And what I love about that sound that was so iconic in 1980 has carried forward, and you get those in Rogue One. You get a couple of scenes in Rogue One. You get them in I guess when they're in Jeddah, there's one that goes by, in the background.
Yep.
You get it in Solo when they're doing the train heist.
And you get it at the end of Clone Wars.
You get it at the end of Clone Wars. You get it in Rebels. Like, it's one of those ones that like they figured out, this is really good, and this builds really good drama. Like, we should do this. And so it really is one of my favorite of all the Star Wars sounds. Like, this would probably be a Mount Rushmore sound for me.
And it's interesting too, as I'm looking at the photo there and thinking about it, Star Wars somehow combines all kinds of different styles. Like, that looks almost like something out of Alien, right? It does not feel Star Wars, but it feels 100% Star Wars, which is so interesting about just the way everything works with Star Wars.
Oh yeah, Jackson says, don't forget Fallen Order too.
That's right.
Absolutely. Some good ones in there. Framey says, so many sensor lenses makes it look like a spider, just like you said, creepy.
Yep.
So
creepy.
That's a good one. My last bonus sound is another one that 2 of the 3 that I ended up picking were like the creepy, scary ones, the things that freaked me out. Empire is my favorite movie. There's no secret about that. It's very similar. As you who have done 100 episodes of 10 questions and picked favorite things, I probably would imagine more people than not picked Empire.
It's true.
It's the AT-AT sound.
Yep.
And here it is. It's loud. It's plundering. It's just one of those things. And again, it's that inevitable creeping death. Like I said to you before we came on air, I picked this picture because it was one available. But the image that I see in my head is that head-on shot in Empire when the 3 of them coming out of the mist, coming out of the distance, and you're looking at them and you can hear it. And it's just, they're big, they're lumbering, and you can't stop them.
And it's almost one of the first. It's not actually a snap zoom, but it is that kind of thing where you see them through the macro binoculars.
Mm-hmm.
But in listening to that clip that you played, because I almost used the AT-AT walker, but the reason I didn't is because of everything that just happened in that clip. Is you're getting the grinding sound of the motors, you're getting the thud of the steps, and you're also getting that high pitched whine, a very unique blaster sound to that, and it just makes it into an animal. I mean, just think about in Mandalorian the way they made the AT-ST, like a creature like from Jurassic Park.
It had a growl to it.
Yeah, and this too, they did such a great job with that. It really became super menacing, and that was what they were going for, obviously.
Without a doubt. And like I said, to me, it's, to borrow a line from Thanos, the AT-ATs feel inevitable. Like you can't avoid them. They're coming.
Yep.
And eventually, wrap a tow cable, send Luke up underneath to throw a detonator.
Yeah.
But otherwise, like, it's this big creeping death.
Yep.
It's bearing down on you and you have to deal with it. Like, that's just the way it goes. So, and that's what I love about this. I love that Star Wars sounds trigger emotions, and it's what makes the movie so good.
Yep.
They wouldn't be nearly the same without all these little elements. And yes, I want to sit in here. I want to sit at Ben Burtt's feet and listen to him tell me how he literally made every single sound that went into Star Wars. Because even in the AT-AT, I hear the servos that I heard in 3PO somewhere because it's a robot. You hear a motor happening. You hear something that's physical, that there's a one-to-one real world connection. We've heard motors, whether it's in a winch on the front of a truck or whether it's in, an elevator that you rode up, whatever it is, it becomes real because you heard it.
But this is the other thing that's amazing about Ben Burtt is all those sounds are kind of built in together to that one massive sound. But as you're talking, I'm thinking about the sound of the single foot that's coming down toward Luke. And there's a different sound that's directly related. It's in the same family, but he's been able to sort of pull out a piece of it that is specific to that moment, but it's not foreign. You know that it's part of that big giant thing that was lumbering there a second ago. It's brilliant. It's so well done.
And there's so many things, like, again, we said this at the beginning, we said it before we came on air, like, we picked 10 things between your list and my add-ons. We haven't come close to scratching the surface of the amazing sound in Star Wars. The Smurfus.
Right.
We haven't gotten
We
haven't gotten into the Wilhelm. We haven't gotten into, like, there was a thing that I feel like I know. One of the first sounds I think I noticed as a kid was when they're on the Death Star in Star Wars and they're blasting stormtroopers. Luke and Leia are on the bridge before they do the swing on the rope.
Yep.
And they're blasting from across the way. And the stormtroopers that fall off and fall, there's that sound that's almost like the air catching the sharp corners of the armor that gives it that Doppler effect. Like, there's a certain sound as it goes past the microphone. Or as
even, you're saying that, and we could have picked the top 10 sounds just from A New Hope, because the sound of the stormtrooper boots on the metal floors.
I had that one saved.
The clicking sound of just the armor.
I mean, through the hallways
with David Drennan with Silver Colored Knob, we end the song Stormtrooper with the troopers running away, because that's such a great sound.
It's such a good sound. Well, and I think about that, and I meant to bring this up earlier when you talked about 3PO. There's again, the number of things that 3PO costume was made out of plastic.
Right.
And there's all this stuff, especially in New Hope, when it was all new and they're figuring it out, that plastic rubbed together and made so much noise that not only did they have to do VO for Anthony Daniels, but they had to do VO with most anybody that was on set in those scenes, whether it was Mark Hamill or whoever, because the clacky plastic, all that noise overshadowed any on-set audio that they're going to be able to get. It's wild. And again, I could spend all night talking about that, but you and I both have to work tomorrow. We both have to be responsible adults. So I want to wrap us up. I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. This has been so much fun.
Oh man, the pleasure was
you are truly one of my favorite people in the Star Wars podcasting circle and sphere. And so to have a chance to hang out and talk like this is so much fun for me. Before we get out of here, I know that you have just finished up. I think, are we calling it season 1 of Around
season
the Galaxy?
1? It was a 2-year season. It was like an extended.
It's so good, but I want you to take an opportunity to talk about anything that you've got coming up. I know you've got a show Tuesday that you want to push a little bit, so it's promo time. Tell us about Around the Galaxy.
Nice, yeah. So Around the Galaxy, this is our first week off, official week off in quite some time, but I'm still going to be on because I want to talk about some upcoming couple changes and some of the future of the show season 2. And what's really I just tweeted about it. It's the first time that I can remember that I have like 5 straight weeks in a row already set up with guests ready to go that I'm so excited about. It's going to be sort of like there's a bunch of really fun guests that we have coming. But yeah, so Tuesday night, join us so I can talk a little bit about where we're going and what we're doing with Around the Galaxy for season 2, which will probably be 2 years, just like season 1 was. But yeah, I'm excited. I hope all of you can join me on Tuesday night, because it's going to be fun. And again, there's no guests, so I'll talk for a couple minutes and then we'll open up to just Q&A. We'll just have some fun and just sort of be a sort of a, not really a forced connect on a Tuesday night, but kind of just hang out and talk a little bit.
I think that's fantastic. And as a dedicated and regular watcher of your show, I will definitely be there. And I'm excited for what you've got coming up. It's such a good feeling to have guests booked and to have people, lined up and feel like, hey, I've at least get to do this for another 5 weeks or whatever.
I know I have a couple weeks left. That's right.
one of my kids asked me tonight before I got on here. She said, "Dad, what are you going to do if you don't have a guest?" I was like, "I'll probably just get on and talk on my own. Like, I have no problem just running my mouth by myself." So thank you, Pete, for being here tonight. To everybody in the live chat, I can't thank you enough for hanging out with us. It means a lot that you take time on a Sunday night to hang out with me, to hang out with my guests. Follow us on Will's Pod on Twitter at Will's Pod. Follow Pete on Twitter at ATGcast. We always appreciate your follows there. Find our YouTube channel, subscribe, hit the bell so that when we come on, you'll know that we're there. And between now and the next time we get together, may the force be with you always.